In part 7 of the CBR900RR restoration series, we'll be refinishing the front wheel, cut and buffing the front fender that we painted in the previous video, painting the exhaust system, both header and silencer, touching up and detailing the tank, replacing the seat cover and replacing the engine cover. So the first thing we'll do is replace this damaged stator cover. So we'll start by draining the oil from the engine, which we're going to change anyway. And as you can see here, we have a very nice new old stock stator cover to replace it. So first thing we're doing is removing the old cover and gasket, and then just simply replacing it with the new old stock cover, and you can see it here after it's been fitted. A pretty simple job. I refill the engine then with fresh Mobil 1 oil, and to complete the fluid refresh on the bike, I decided to flush the front and rear brake master cylinders and the clutch master cylinder, and replace all of the brake fluid with brand new liquid moly DOT4 fluid. So with the engine and chassis refresh complete, I now focus on restoring the remaining components for the front end, starting with the front wheel. As with the rear wheel, there's significant paint damage around the rim, outer rim of the wheel on both sides, caused by stone chips and tire changes in the past. So again, I opt to only repaint the damaged areas and then blend those in with the center of the wheel. I know this may be controversial versus just repainting the entire wheel, but the result is similar, with far less time invested. And for a project of this kind and this nature, where we're trying to retain as much of the originality as possible, I think it's just the better direction to go. If it was a full nut and bolt, engine out, frame off restoration, I would most definitely pull the tires and do a complete wheel respray, as I've shown in some of my other videos. So we first mask off the areas to be painted, and note here that I'm using foil for this rather than masking paper, as it's easier to comply with complex shapes and curves. For the edge that we'll be painting up to, that will be blended with the rest of the wheel, I'm using a soft edge foam tape that you can see here. So once that's in place and we're ready to paint the wheel, I give it a final rub down with a red Scotch-Brite pad, just to make sure we get a good key with the new paint. Blow that off and clean it down with some paint prep. And then I apply first the Honda gloss base coat, the black gloss base coat, followed by a thin coat of clear. And for this, because I want to keep the thickness of the clear as close to the original factory clear as possible, which is usually very, very thin coat, I'm using what's called a panel blend clear, which typically has less than 50% of the solids in a normal clear. So once the clear is sprayed on, we immediately remove the inner masking and the soft edge tape, and while the clear is still setting, we use the 1K spot blender, and we spray the spot blender along the all the way along the edge of the new paint where it blends into the old paint. And this just adds an extra little bit of thinning to the clear coat at that edge, and gives a more blended, softer transition into the older paint. So once the paint is fully cured, I remove the rest of the masking, and I go over the entire wheel by hand with a medium cut polishing compound to get the final finish. And then I thoroughly clean the brake discs, polish up the bolts, and refit the discs to the front wheel. And as you can see, a great final result. So next we're tackling the exhaust system, starting with the headers. And the first thing, it's important to give them a good clean before we apply any coating to them. And I find that actually SOS pads are perfect for this application. Once the header is thoroughly cleaned and we're sure we've got all the oil and road muck off the exhaust, I then paint the headers using the KBS Extreme High Temp Satin Black paint. And I find this to be one of the more robust finishes, high temp finishes on the market, and I've tried many different brands, and I find this holds up well to the extreme temperatures over time. And the paint is fully cured once we fit the headers to the engine and we do a couple of temperature cycles. So here I'm fitting the freshly painted headers to the motorcycle, and I'm using all new gaskets, of course. And then once I've completed the installation, I do actually run up the engine and do a couple of heat cycles to ensure that the paint fully cures. So moving on to the silencer, it's pretty heavily marked. It has some deep gouges in the actual metal finish itself, and there's quite a bit of oxidization that's got under the paint. So first thing I do is sand back as much of the original coating as possible to the point where any defects in the paint and any oxidization has been removed. And then I use JB Weld as a filler for the deeper gouges in the metalwork itself. The silencer doesn't reach the same temps as the header, and JB Weld works really well for this application. As the silencer's original finish is gloss black from the factory, I'm using a single stage high temp paint, again from KBS, called Motor Coater, and I apply this with a fine tip detailing spray gun just to reduce the orange peel as much as possible and avoid the need to have to cut and buff the silencer afterwards. And I think, you know, the results speak for themselves. So turning our attention to the gas tank, its original paint and decals are in excellent condition, but there are a few paint chips that need to be addressed, and the clear coat is definitely in need of a cut and buff. So starting with the paint chips, I first dress the surrounding area with a 3000 grit foam pad just to give a key for the touch-up paint, and then I apply the touch-up paint to the chips in thin layers, building the layers up over several days until the paint level of the new area sits above the surrounding clear coat. Once that's cured, I then sand the touch-up areas flat with 2000 grit wet and dry and a hard sanding block. I then wet sand the entire tank with 2000 grit paper, followed up with a 3000 grit foam pad, first covering up the tank labels with tape so as to protect them. At this stage we can start to buff the clear coat, first with a heavy compound and a heavy cutting pad. Then we switch to a medium cut compound and medium cut pad, and finally a fine polish with a micro pad. And typically each stage requires 2 to 3 passes to get the best results. And here you can see the gas tank has come up absolutely beautiful in its original vibrant paint. Yeah, so very happy with the outcome of this. It's quite unusual to be able to have such an original tank come back to this kind of condition, which is maybe better than actually showroom. In the previous video we repainted the entire front fender, and now we just need to cut and buff it to the same level of finish as the other panels and the gas tank. So again, I'm just using the exact same process as before, as I've just used on the gas tank, to achieve a mirror-like finish. And now we really only have some small parts remaining to be detailed or refinished, but I do want to try and address the staining on the opaque fork protectors slash fender mounts, which has probably been caused by leaking fork seals in the past. Now, because these are unpainted plastic parts in their original natural finish, I prefer not to just paint over them, and the same would go for any kind of overflow tank or expansion tank, or for instance a 2-stroke oil tank that's produced in the same material. So the process I use here is to submerge the parts in a high concentrate of hydrogen peroxide, and the bleaching action effectively removes any organic material or contaminants from within the plastic without damaging it. Now, this process can actually take several weeks, but you can speed it up by placing the parts in the solution in direct sunlight. Now, I have had mixed results with the process depending on the hardness of the plastic. Soft ABS header tanks seem to respond well, but these protectors are quite a bit harder material, so I'm a little, it's quite unsure what the final result will be, but we'll see that once we do the final assembly and reveal for the bike. And lastly, I'm going to address the tear in the seat. The cost to just fixed the tear itself, came out at about the same as replacing the cover. So I opted to just replace the cover. And while that seems overkill, with a restoration of this quality, just the smallest detail like this can make all the difference. Yeah, so in the final video, I'll be reassembling the front end, taking the bike for a shakedown ride, and doing a final reveal.